My name is Andreas Harmon, and at 32, I never expected my quiet life as an antique shop owner would explode into chaos over turkey and pumpkin pie. For years, my family dismissed my passion as a waste of potential, never suspecting I had built a fortune of $15 million right under their noses. Last Thanksgiving, my sister accidentally discovered my secret, and within hours, my family transformed from dismissive to demanding. They insisted I owed them millions. But before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button to join my journey. Growing up in an affluent Boston suburb shaped my early understanding of what success meant in my family. My parents, Harold and Diana Harmon, were obsessed with status and appearances. Our Tudor-style home in Wellesley served as the perfect backdrop for their carefully cultivated image of prosperity and achievement. Dad drove a new luxury car every 2 years, and Mom organized charity galas that were more about being seen than the causes they supported. From childhood, it was clear that my sister Julia held a special place in our family. 3 years my senior, she was the golden child, the academic superstar who collected accolades like some kids collected baseball cards. Her perfect grades, debate team championships, and student council presidency were topics of endless discussion at family gatherings. Julia is going to change the world, my father would announce proudly to anyone who would listen. My parents built their lives around careers that commanded respect and provided the lifestyle they deemed essential. My father, Harold, worked 60-hour weeks as a corporate attorney for a prestigious Boston firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions. My mother, Diana, served as an administrator at Massachusetts General Hospital, a position she reminded dinner guests offered both meaningful work and appropriate status. They had mapped out similar paths for their children, with medicine, law, or finance being the only acceptable options. I discovered my passion for history and antiques at age 10 when my grandfather passed away, leaving me his collection of Civil War-era coins. While other kids played video games, I spent hours researching each coin, learning about the historical context that gave them meaning beyond their monetary value. I loved how these small metal discs connected me to another time, how they had passed through countless hands before finding their way to mine. I began visiting yard sales with my allowance money, developing an eye for overlooked treasures. Andreas is just playing with junk again, my mother would sigh whenever I excitedly showed her a vintage baseball card or antique doorknob I had rescued from someone's discard pile. These dismissals always came in sharp contrast to the celebration that followed Julia's achievements. When she won the state science fair, my parents threw her a party. When I discovered a rare buffalo nickel at a garage sale and successfully researched its value, they barely glanced up from their phones. High school became a battlefield where I struggled to meet my parents' expectations while nurturing my true interests. I joined the debate team because Julia had been captain. I took advanced placement economics because my father insisted it would prepare me for the real world. But every free moment was spent at local estate sales or in the public library's historical archives. I maintained decent grades, but lacked the passion for the subjects my parents valued, which they interpreted as laziness or defiance. When Julia was accepted to Harvard Law School, our house practically vibrated with pride. My father bought celebratory cigars, and my mother commissioned professional photographs of Julia beside her acceptance letter. 6 months later, I reluctantly enrolled at Wharton Business School, my father's alma mater. The business world is where real value is created, he told me, as he wrote the tuition check, his expression making it clear this was my last chance to redeem myself in his eyes. The day I dropped out of Wharton after my sophomore year remains one of the most difficult and liberating days of my life. I had met Walter Simmons, an elderly antique dealer, during a weekend trip to a Boston market. We talked for hours about 18th century craftsmanship, and by the end of our conversation, he had offered me an apprenticeship. When I called my parents to explain my decision, my father's voice turned to ice. If you throw away this opportunity, do not expect another penny from us, ever. I understand, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. That evening, I packed everything that mattered into my 10-year-old Honda and drove to Boston, where Walter had offered me the spare room above his shop, Timeless Treasures. At 20 years old, I walked away from financial security into complete uncertainty, guided only by the conviction that I needed to follow my own path. The small apartment above Walter's shop became my first real home. Unlike the pristine, magazine-worthy rooms of my parents' house, this space had character in its slanted floors and exposed brick walls. Walter Simmons quickly became more than a mentor. He became the father figure I had always longed for. In his 70s, with a snow-white beard and hands gnarled from arthritis, Walter moved through his collection with reverence, teaching me to see beyond surface appearances to the true craftsmanship and historical significance of each piece. Value isn't what someone will pay, Walter would say, as we examined a colonial-era writing desk or hand-blown glass bottle. Value is in the story, the craftsmanship, the connection to our shared past. Most people miss it because they only see dollar signs. The first Thanksgiving, after leaving school, I reluctantly accepted Julia's invitation to dinner. She had recently married Thomas Thompson, a dermatologist with a practice in downtown Boston, further cementing her status in our family hierarchy. Throughout the meal, Julia and my parents took turns, making subtle jabs about my little junk shop hobby and when I might come to my senses. My father slipped a Wharton application into my coat pocket as I left. As Julia's life expanded to include a sprawling house in Cambridge and 2 new luxury cars, her condescension toward my chosen path only grew. "It must be so simple to just play with old things all day," she would say during obligatory family gatherings. "Some of us have real responsibilities." Each comment stung, but I found solace in returning to the shop, where Walter would be waiting with a new acquisition to authenticate or a restoration technique to master. Under Walter's guidance, I developed expertise in American furniture from the Revolutionary period through the early 19th century. I learned to identify regional variations in construction techniques, to spot the telltale signs of specific craftsmen, and to distinguish between original pieces and well-made reproductions. Most importantly, I learned patience, the willingness to look deeper than others were willing to. When Walter passed away suddenly from a heart attack 5 years after I joined him, I was devastated. He left me his small shop in his will, along with his supplier contacts and client list. To Andreas, the will read, who saw the value in what I had to teach when others saw only an old man with old things. I asked my family to attend the funeral, to honor the man who had shaped my life so profoundly, but they declined with various excuses about busy schedules and prior commitments. Standing alone at Walter's grave, I made a silent promise to honor his legacy by building on what he had taught me. I would prove that his faith in me had not been misplaced, that there was indeed value in preserving history and craftsmanship in a world increasingly focused on disposable convenience. With determination born of grief, I returned to the shop now mine to continue what we had started together. The first major decision I made after Walter's death was to rename the shop Hidden Treasures, a tribute to his philosophy of finding value where others missed it. I kept the storefront deliberately modest, even a bit weathered, knowing that serious collectors appreciated authenticity over flashy displays. The worn wooden sign, hand-painted window lettering, and creaky front door all contributed to an atmosphere of discovery that clients found charming and genuine. My first breakthrough came unexpectedly at an estate sale in Beacon Hill. Among a collection of tarnished silver serving pieces, I noticed distinctive hand-hammering patterns on what was labeled as a Victorian-era serving bowl. Something about the weight and patination struck me as far older, and I purchased it for $300. After careful cleaning and examination under magnification, I found a tiny maker's mark that made my heart race a previously unidentified Paul Revere silver piece. The research process took weeks as I consulted with experts at the Museum of Fine Arts and the Massachusetts Historical Society. I documented the provenance as thoroughly as possible, tracing the bowl back to its original owner, a merchant who had supported the revolutionary cause. When the authentication was complete, the Boston Historical Society purchased the piece for $275,000, nearly 1,000 times what I had paid. As I deposited the check, I made a conscious decision not to tell my family about this windfall. Years of dismissive comments and condescension had taught me that they would view this success not as validation of my expertise, but as an opportunity to insert themselves into my financial affairs. "Why waste money on an apartment when you could live with us?" my mother would say. "I know some excellent investment advisors," my father would insist, meaning his friends who would report back on every detail of my finances. Over the next few years, I developed a systematic approach to identifying overlooked treasures. Early morning estate sales in wealthy neighborhoods, auctions at small regional houses rather than the famous ones, and relationships with house clearance companies all became sources for potential finds. I learned to look beyond the obvious valuable items that attracted other dealers, focusing instead on pieces that required knowledge and context to appreciate. My second major find came 6 months after the Silver Bowl. I purchased an early American writing desk with extensive damage to its surface, planning to restore it as a learning exercise. While removing the damaged veneer, I discovered a hidden compartment containing a collection of Revolutionary War-era documents, including letters signed by John Adams, discussing the Continental Congress. After proper authentication and conservation, these documents sold to a private collector for just over $400,000. As my financial situation improved, I recognized the need for professional advice. Through a client who worked in finance, I met Sarah Williams, a financial advisor specializing in wealth management for entrepreneurs. Unlike the aggressive investment managers my father favored, Sarah took a balanced approach focused on steady growth and preservation. "Your business gives you the excitement and risk," she observed during our first meeting. "Your investments should provide stability and security." Under Sarah's guidance, I established a pattern of living modestly while strategically investing my earnings. My apartment above the shop remained my home, though I made small improvements for comfort and added proper security. I drove the same reliable car for years, dressed in quality but understated clothing, and avoided the conspicuous consumption that had defined my parents' lifestyle. Meanwhile, my investment portfolio grew steadily through a diversified mix of real estate, index funds, and selected blue-chip stocks. 6 years after taking over Walter's shop, I had the opportunity to purchase the entire building when the owner decided to retire to Florida. The 3-story brick structure housed my shop on the ground floor, my apartment on the second, and a rentable space on the third that I eventually converted into a climate-controlled storage and research area. Owning the building provided both security and flexibility, allowing me to make modifications that improved my business operations. During this period of growing financial success, I continued to make important discoveries. A set of rare navigational maps hidden in the lining of an old sea captain's trunk. A painting by a significant early American artist that had been incorrectly attributed to a lesser-known contemporary furniture pieces with hidden provenance that connected them to historically significant figures. Each find reinforced my reputation among serious collectors and museum curators, creating a virtuous cycle of access to better estates and collections. My investment portfolio crossed the $1 million mark 3 years after Walter's death, $5 million 2 years later, and continued to grow through compound interest and additional profits from the business. By the time of the fateful Thanksgiving dinner, my net worth had reached $15 million, a fact known only to me, Sarah, and my accountant. To the outside world, including my family, I remained simply a modestly successful antique dealer with a small specialty shop. The contrast between my actual financial situation and my family's perception created increasingly awkward dynamics at obligatory gatherings. Julia, now mother to Emma and Jacob, never missed an opportunity to compare our life choices. "The private school tuition is astronomical," she would sigh, "but sacrificing for education is what responsible adults do." The implication that I had chosen an irresponsible path hung in the air like stale perfume. My parents continued their campaign of attempted course correction well into my 30s. Every Christmas brought some version of the same gift: business school applications, books with titles like Transitioning to Corporate Success, or gift certificates for custom suits. for when you need to make a real impression. Each present came wrapped in the assumption that my current life was merely a phase to be outgrown. When you finally grow up and get a real job, you can join the country club, Julia mentioned during one summer gathering, as though membership in her social circle was the ultimate prize I was missing. I smiled politely and changed the subject, knowing that explaining my contentment would only be interpreted as defensiveness. Despite my family's persistent misunderstanding, I found deep fulfillment in my work. Beyond the thrill of discovery and financial reward, I valued the preservation aspect of my profession. Each piece I rescued from obscurity or potential destruction represented a fragment of history saved for future generations. I developed relationships with museum curators and educational programs, occasionally donating significant pieces that deserved public access rather than private ownership. Over time, I built a reputation among serious collectors and institutions as a dealer of impeccable integrity and exceptional knowledge. Museum curators began calling me first when searching for specific items to complete collections. Wealthy clients trusted me to build their collections with authentic, significant pieces rather than showy reproductions. Academic researchers consulted me on questions of historical craftsmanship and material culture. None of this professional respect registered with my family, who continued to see me as the college dropout playing with old furniture. After years of enduring Julia's elaborate Thanksgiving productions at her house, where my modest contributions were inevitably relegated to the children's table, I reluctantly agreed to host the holiday meal at my place. This decision came after months of not-so-subtle hints from my mother about how I should take my turn with family obligations. Though I anticipated criticism of my smaller space, I saw an opportunity to share a glimpse of my world with them, perhaps finally gaining some understanding. The weeks before Thanksgiving found me preparing with uncharacteristic anxiety. I thoroughly cleaned my apartment, invested in new dining chairs to accommodate everyone, and planned a menu that incorporated both traditional family recipes and some elevated touches I had learned from a chef client. I selected wines that would impress even my father's discerning palate and arranged fresh flowers throughout the space. Despite knowing better, some part of me still hoped for their approval. Julia arrived first, 90 minutes before the agreed time, with her husband Thomas and their children, Emma and Jacob, aged 8 and 6. "We thought we'd come early to help," she announced, though her critical gaze sweeping the apartment suggested different motives. "It's so quaint up here. The children need to see how different people live." 8-year-old Emma wrinkled her nose at my vintage record player, while Jacob immediately began touching everything within reach. "Is this real?" Julia asked, fingering the curtains in my living room. "I thought you would have upgraded to something more modern by now. But I suppose it works with all this older stuff." Her tone managed to transform my carefully curated collection of period-appropriate furnishings into something akin to trash picked from the curb. Thomas followed behind her, making comments about the interesting structural features of the old building, code for his concern about its safety and stability. My parents arrived precisely on time, my father checking his watch as I opened the door as if to confirm my punctuality. My mother, Diana, stepped over the threshold with the caution of someone entering uncertain territory. "Andreas, darling, you really should have warned us about the stairs," she said, patting her perfectly coiffed hair. "And this neighborhood seems so industrial." The fact that my shop sat in one of Boston's newly fashionable historic districts, surrounded by artisanal bakeries and boutique clothing stores, seemed lost on her. "It must be interesting living above your shop," my father commented, as I poured him a glass of 30-year-old scotch I had been saving for a special occasion. "Convenient, I suppose, if not exactly aspirational." He accepted the drink with a nod that acknowledged its quality, though he refrained from commenting on it. "How's business these days? Still finding enough people interested in old furniture?" While serving pre-dinner drinks and appetizers, I endured a barrage of thinly veiled questions about my future plans. "The antique market must be challenging with millennials preferring IKEA," my mother observed, as though I were not aware of market trends in my own industry. "Have you thought about getting some additional certifications?" It's never too late to pivot to something more stable. Julia dominated conversation as always, detailing the extensive renovations on their new 5-bedroom house in Beacon Hill. The historical commission was such a pain about the windows, she complained, but Thomas insisted we needed the address. Worth every penny of the $3.2 million, though. Location is everything. She glanced around my apartment with exaggerated sympathy. Of course, some people prefer cozier spaces. As dinner preparation reached its final stages, I excused myself to check on the turkey and finish the gravy. That morning, I had been reviewing my quarterly investment statement from Sarah, pleased to see the portfolio had crossed the $15 million mark despite recent market fluctuations. In my haste to prepare for my family's early arrival, I had left the statement on the coffee table, partially covered by a book on colonial furniture makers, something I would regret within the hour. I was mashing potatoes when Julia entered the kitchen, her face flushed with what I initially mistook for the heat of the small space. She held my investment portfolio statement in her manicured hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Andreas, what is this?" she demanded, her voice pitched higher than normal. "Is this real? $15 million? Is this some kind of joke?" The wooden spoon in my hand froze mid-stir as I processed what had happened. My sister had been snooping through my things and found the one document I should have secured in my safe. "That's private, Julia," I said quietly, reaching for the paper. She pulled it back, clutching it to her chest. "Is it real?" she repeated, her voice now a harsh whisper. "How could you possibly have this much money? What have you been doing?" "Yes, it's real," I confirmed, seeing no point in lying once she had seen the figures. "I've been successful in my business and made some good investments. Now please, can we discuss this later and focus on dinner? Everything's almost ready." The atmosphere at the dining table had transformed entirely. Julia's usual domineering conversation gave way to uncharacteristic silence as she picked at her food, occasionally shooting me calculating glances. My parents maintained their polite facades, but I noticed my father's eyes darting to my simple furnishings with new assessment, as though trying to reconcile the modest surroundings with the figure he must now know existed in my accounts. Thomas, typically reserved at family gatherings, suddenly engaged me in financial discussion, probing about my investment strategy and tax planning. "Have you considered offshore options?" he asked between bites of turkey. A friend of mine at Massachusetts General has had great success sheltering his practice income through some interesting structures in the Caymans. "I prefer to keep things straightforward and domestic," I replied, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Sarah, my advisor, focuses on ethical, sustainable investments. This comment prompted a flurry of questions about who managed my money, how long we had worked together, and whether I was satisfied with her performance. Most surreal was watching my parents transform before my eyes from dismissive to overly proud. "Andreas has always had an exceptional eye for value," my father announced, as though this had been his consistent position for decades rather than a complete reversal. "I remember when he was just a boy, finding that coin collection. We always knew he had tremendous potential." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "Darling, you should have told us about your success. We would have celebrated with you. You know how proud we are of our children's accomplishments." The moment felt hollow, her sudden pride clearly tied to the number on the statement rather than any understanding of what I had built. Throughout dessert, I noticed the undercurrent of tension, the calculating looks exchanged between family members. Thomas positioned himself beside me, on the pretext of examining a Windsor chair in my dining room, using his phone to take what he thought was a discreet photo of some documents on my sideboard. Julia kept steering conversation toward future family gatherings, suddenly insistent that we should spend more quality time together as a family. The evening ended earlier than planned, with unusual warmth in the goodbyes. My mother hugged me tightly, something she rarely did. "We need to talk more soon, Andreas. There's so much catching up to do." My father shook my hand with newfound respect, holding the grip longer than necessary. "Son, we should have lunch next week. I have some ideas I'd like to run by you." Julia lingered at the door, arranging for Emma and Jacob to give me exaggerated hugs. "Family is everything, isn't it?" she said, her voice sweet, but her eyes sharp. "We need to support each other, really be there for one another." As they descended the stairs to the street, I closed the door with a growing sense of unease, knowing that my life had just fundamentally changed. The first call came at 9:30 the next morning, Black Friday, as I was opening the shop for what I hoped would be a busy shopping day. My mother's number flashed on the screen. Unusual, given that she typically waited days after family gatherings before making contact. "Andreas, dear," she began without preamble, "your father and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you." "Concerned?" I echoed, watching a couple examine a federal period mirror near the window. "What about?" "Well, this money situation. 15 million is a lot for someone with no financial background to manage. We're worried you might be overwhelmed." Her voice carried the false concern I recognized from childhood, the tone that preceded unwanted intervention. "You know your father has excellent connections in wealth management. We just want to make sure you're protected." By the time I ended the call 20 minutes later, the suggestion had been made 3 times that I should share my blessings with family. "Julia has the children's education to consider," my mother reminded me. "And your father and I aren't getting any younger." Our retirement portfolio took quite a hit in the last downturn. Saturday passed without contact, but Sunday morning brought a text message from Julia. "Emma's private school is raising tuition again next year. Almost 40,000 per child now. Crazy how expensive quality education has become. Wondering if we could talk about some family financial planning? For the kids?" I left the message unanswered, focusing instead on a promising lead about an estate sale in Cambridge that included items from a prominent colonial-era family. By late afternoon, however, my phone showed 5 missed calls from my sister and another from my father. I returned my father's call first, hoping for the less dramatic conversation. "Andreas, your mother and I would like to stop by this evening if you're free," he said, his tone uncharacteristically warm. "Nothing formal, just a family check-in. We can bring dinner if that helps." They arrived at 7 with takeout from an expensive Italian restaurant and a briefcase full of brochures for financial advisors they personally trusted. My mother settled onto my sofa, looking around with new interest. "You know, this place has more character than I initially gave it credit for. Have you thought about buying the building? Real estate is always a sound investment." "I already own it," I said simply, serving the pasta onto plates. "I purchased it 4 years ago." My parents exchanged glances. "The whole building?" my father clarified. When I nodded, he cleared his throat. "That's exactly the kind of smart thinking we want to encourage. But Andreas, there are tax implications to consider with commercial real estate. Our friend Patrick specializes in high net worth real estate portfolios. He could really help optimize your situation." The evening progressed with increasing transparency about their motives. By dessert, my mother had mentioned 3 times that they had always supported my dreams, despite clear evidence to the contrary, and my father had outlined how a family financial strategy could benefit everyone. "Julia and Thomas are stretched thin with the children," he explained. "And frankly, your mother and I hadn't anticipated the current health insurance premiums at our age." As they left, my mother pressed an invitation into my hand. "Julia's hosting dinner Tuesday evening. Family matters to discuss. Nothing formal, but do try to dress appropriately." Her eyes lingered on my casual clothes with new disappointment, as though my failure to present myself as wealthy was now a personal affront to her. Tuesday evening found me parking my practical sedan between Thomas's Mercedes and my father's BMW in Julia's circular driveway. The house, impressive by any standard, loomed with all its windows illuminated, a statement of success visible from blocks away. Julia greeted me with an enthusiastic hug that felt foreign after years of cool reception. "Everyone's in the living room," she trilled. "Even Uncle Robert came down from New Hampshire." I stepped into what I quickly realized was a family ambush. Not only were my parents present, but also my father's brother Robert, my mother's sister Audrey, and her husband Stephen, and my cousin Patrick, with his wife Melissa. Julia had arranged the seating like a corporate presentation. with chairs facing a whiteboard she had apparently installed for the occasion. "Now that everyone's here, we can begin," Julia announced, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used for her pharmaceutical corporate presentations. "I've called this family meeting because we need to discuss some important developments that affect us all." For the next 20 minutes, I sat in stunned silence as Julia delivered what could only be described as a PowerPoint presentation on family equity and shared prosperity. She had prepared slides showing family expenses, educational projections for her children, and retirement calculations for our parents. Throughout this presentation, she repeatedly emphasized how I had benefited from family privilege and generational advantage. While some of us focused on building traditional families and supporting our parents, she said, glancing meaningfully at me, others were able to pursue personal interests without these responsibilities. Now that success has come from these pursuits, it's time to rebalance family resources. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees when Thomas stood up, taking Julia's place at the whiteboard. The dermatologist, whose practiced bedside manner usually masked his calculating nature, presented a detailed spreadsheet projecting family expenses over the next 20 years. "As you can see," he said, circling a figure with a red marker, "the combined cost of premier education for Emma and Jacob through graduate school approaches $2.4 million. Add to that your parents' retirement needs of approximately $3 million for quality care, and we're looking at significant family obligations." Then came the moment that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my family forever. Julia stepped forward, hands clasped in front of her, as though in supplication. "Andreas, we believe the fair and right thing would be for you to transfer $5 million to our account to secure the children's future and help us manage the family obligations we've been carrying." The silence that followed felt physical, pressing against my ears as I struggled to process what I had just heard. "Excuse me?" I finally managed. "5 million, Julia repeated firmly. "Considering your total assets, that leaves you with more than enough for yourself. The difference is that I have actual responsibilities, children who deserve the best opportunities, and parents who need support. What do you need that money for? More dusty furniture?" I looked to my parents, expecting them to moderate this outrageous demand. Instead, my father cleared his throat and added, "Your mother and I have discussed this as well. We feel that establishing a $2 million retirement fund for us would be appropriate recognition of the opportunities and education we provided you." Before I could respond, Uncle Robert leaned forward in his chair. "Don't forget, Andreas, none of this would have been possible without the family that raised you. The connections, the education, the opportunities we all provided. There's a debt there that needs acknowledging." I stood up, needing physical distance from the circle of expectant faces. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "For the past decade, you've dismissed my career choice, mocked my passion, and minimized my achievements. You've made it clear you think I wasted my education and disappointed the family. Now that you've discovered I've built something valuable, despite your lack of support, you feel entitled to millions of dollars?" Julia's face flushed with anger. "That's not fair. We always supported you." "When?" I challenged. "When Dad threatened to cut me off if I left Wharton? When none of you attended Walter's funeral even knowing how important he was to me? Or maybe during all those holidays where you talked about my shop like it was a childish phase I needed to outgrow?" "You're twisting things," my mother interjected, her voice sharp. "Families have disagreements, but at the end of the day, we're still family. And family takes care of each other." "This isn't about taking care of each other," I replied. "This is about suddenly seeing me as an ATM. The answer is no. I won't be transferring money to anyone." The reaction was immediate and hostile. Julia burst into tears, a tactic she had perfected since childhood. "You've always been selfish. You have no idea what it's like to have real responsibilities, to have children depending on you, to worry about their future." My father's face hardened into the disapproving mask I knew well. "I'm disappointed in your attitude, Andreas. After everything we've done for you, this is how you respond to family needs? Perhaps you need time to reconsider your priorities." "If this is your response," my mother added, her voice trembling with what I recognized as controlled rage rather than hurt. "You might want to rethink your participation in family gatherings moving forward. Family means mutual support, not selfish hoarding." I looked around the room at these people, who shared my blood, but who had never truly seen me, never valued what mattered to me, until it came with a dollar sign attached. Without another word, I walked out, the sound of Julia's theatrical sobbing following me down the hallway. As I started my car, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: betrayal, certainly, but also a strange sense of clarity. The masks had finally dropped, revealing the transactional nature of what I had always wanted to believe were unconditional relationships. The days following the family meeting brought a barrage of messages from extended family members, none of whom had shown interest in my life for years. Cousin Patrick, who had sat silently during Julia's presentation, sent a long text about his struggling landscaping business and how family support during tough times is what separates us from the animals. My mother's sister Audrey called to express her disappointment in my attitude, despite having forgotten my birthday for the past 3 years. The coordinated nature of these contacts made it clear that Julia had been busy. This suspicion was confirmed when I opened Facebook to find her passive-aggressive post, "Heartbroken when family members hoard wealth while watching others struggle." True character is revealed not in what we accumulate, but in what we're willing to share with those who gave us life and love. The post had gathered dozens of sympathetic comments, including several from relatives who had been at the ambush dinner. My attempt to maintain normal business operations became complicated when my parents showed up at Hidden Treasures during a busy Saturday afternoon. My father, dressed as though attending a board meeting rather than visiting an antique shop, loudly inquired about financial planning discussions while customers browsed nearby. My mother examined a Queen Anne side table with exaggerated interest, commenting that family heirlooms should stay in the family, not be sold to strangers. The lowest moment came the following week when Emma and Jacob appeared at the shop after school, clutching handwritten notes. My niece and nephew, whom I genuinely cared for despite their parents' behavior, had clearly been coached. 8-year-old Emma's letter asked why Uncle Andreas doesn't love us enough to help with school, while 6-year-old Jacob's crayon drawing showed a stick figure alone atop a pile of gold coins, while other figures stood crying below. The children seemed confused by their mission, Emma whispering. "Mom said to make sure you read them while we're here." My initial shock at these manipulations transformed into anger when I discovered through Sarah that Thomas had contacted my bank, claiming to be my financial advisor. "He tried to get information about your accounts," she told me during an emergency meeting. Fortunately, the bank verified his identity before disclosing anything. "Andreas, you need to put additional security measures in place immediately." The betrayal expanded beyond immediate family. Through a loyal client who moved in the same social circles as Julia, I learned she had been telling cousins and family friends that I had promised to pay for all family college expenses, but was now having a midlife crisis and reneging on these fictional commitments. The same client awkwardly mentioned that Thomas had been asking detailed questions about the provenance and value of items in my shop, particularly those I had recently acquired. My business began to suffer as anonymous negative reviews appeared online for Hidden Treasures. "Overpriced reproductions sold as authentic antiques," read one. "Owner doesn't stand behind his appraisals," claimed another. Though I had built strong relationships with serious collectors who knew better than to trust anonymous reviews, newer clients began canceling appointments, and walk-in traffic noticeably decreased. Julia's campaign took an even more public turn when she created an online fundraiser titled Emma's Education Fund, with a lengthy description about providing opportunities despite family challenges. The fundraiser didn't mention me by name, but included pointed references to relatives with abundant resources who choose not to support the next generation. To my horror, several family friends contributed, leaving comments about how some people forget where they came from. The holiday season, typically my busiest time, brought Christmas cards from family members I barely knew, each containing handwritten notes about their financial needs. Danielle's Ballet Academy raised their fees again, wrote a second cousin I hadn't seen in 15 years. "We remember how you always admired her dancing as a toddler." My father's college roommate sent a card mentioning his son's exciting tech startup that just needs angel investing to become the next unicorn. The confrontation with Thomas came unexpectedly at a cafe near my shop, where I often had lunch. I was reviewing auction catalogs when he slid into the seat across from me, uninvited. "This has gone on long enough, Andreas," he said, his voice low but intense. "Your behavior is causing Julia tremendous stress, which isn't good for the children." "My behavior?" I replied, closing the catalog. "I'm not the one orchestrating a family shakedown." Thomas leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming in the small space. "Do you really want us looking more closely at how you acquired your fortune? The IRS takes a very interested view of cash-heavy businesses like antiques. Art and antiquities are classic vehicles for tax evasion." The implication was clear: cooperate or face potential legal problems, regardless of whether any existed. "Are you threatening me, Thomas?" "I'm suggesting that families should resolve matters privately," he replied, standing to leave. "Julia expects to hear from you by the end of the week with a reasonable proposal. Otherwise, things might become more complicated." The rumors spread by Julia became increasingly damaging to my professional reputation. A museum curator who had worked with me for years called to ask, delicately, about concerns raised regarding authentication practices. It took an hour-long conversation and offers to provide independent verification of recent sales to reassure him that I had not, as Julia had apparently suggested at a fundraising gala, built my business by selling sophisticated forgeries to unsuspecting clients. My parents contributed to the campaign by telling family friends that I had mental problems stemming from my unhealthy obsession with old things. My mother even contacted a therapist specializing in hoarding disorders, who called me expressing concern about my inability to part with possessions, another complete fabrication designed to paint me as unstable and irrational. The invasion of privacy escalated when I discovered through a bank security alert that Julia had hired a private investigator to look into my business dealings. The investigator had attempted to access my business records by impersonating a tax auditor, a tactic that fortunately failed due to my accountant's proper security protocols. "This is getting serious," my accountant warned. "Someone is actively trying to find or create problems with your business records." The ultimate betrayal arrived via certified mail. Legal documents from Julia's attorney claiming I had stolen family heirlooms that rightfully belonged to all descendants. The lawsuit alleged that items from our grandparents' estate, which had been legitimately left to me in our grandmother's will, had been unlawfully retained and should be considered joint family property. The documents included a comprehensive list of items from my shop inventory, many of which had no connection to our grandparents, but which Julia claimed had sentimental family value. Most concerning was the temporary restraining order preventing me from selling certain items in my shop items that represented a significant portion of my current inventory. With the busiest sales season approaching, this legal maneuver threatened not just my reputation, but the business itself. The news of the lawsuit quickly reached clients and fellow dealers, causing several pending sales to be put on hold as buyers feared becoming entangled in a family legal dispute. As I sat in my apartment above the now partially shuttered shop, reading through the legal documents that misrepresented both facts and the law, I felt a profound sense of isolation. The family I had always hoped would eventually understand and accept me had instead revealed themselves willing to destroy what I had built out of pure greed. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, leaving me questioning not just these relationships, but my own judgment in continuing to seek their approval for so many years. In the darkest days following Julia's lawsuit, I seriously considered giving in to their demands. The legal costs of fighting would be substantial, and the damage to my reputation might be irreparable even if I won. Perhaps $5 million was a reasonable price to pay for peace and the ability to continue my business without constant sabotage. I spent a sleepless night calculating how much I could transfer without compromising my long-term security, how much my principals were worth in cold, hard cash. The next morning, feeling defeated, I went to the climate-controlled storage room where I kept Walter's personal effects. Among his possessions was a collection of leather-bound journals documenting his 50 years in the antique business. I had read parts of them over the years, but that day I pulled out volumes from the 1980 seconds, when Walter had faced his own professional crisis after being accused of selling misattributed pieces by a jealous competitor. "Integrity cannot be purchased back once sold," he had written. "In this business, your word and expertise are your only true assets. Everything else can be rebuilt if lost." Another entry read, "Those who value things only for their price tag will never understand true worth. Stand firm when you know you're right, even if standing alone is terrifying." Walter's words reconnected me to the values that had guided my career and life choices. I realized that giving in to extortion not only betrayed those values, but would never satisfy the growing demands. The 5 million would become 7, then 10. The family needs would multiply endlessly once this method proved effective. I needed to fight back, not with the same underhanded tactics, but with truth and principle. My first call was to Elaine Morgan, an attorney specializing in estate disputes who had helped several of my clients with complex inheritance issues. After reviewing the lawsuit documents and listening to the full story of the family conflict, she was blunt in her assessment. "This case has no legal merit, but it's clearly designed to pressure you into settlement. Before we respond formally, I'd like to understand what we're really dealing with here." Elaine's investigation revealed disturbing information about Julia and Thomas's financial situation. Despite their mansion and luxury cars, they were carrying $1.2 million in debt. Credit card statements obtained through legal discovery showed monthly charges far beyond even their substantial combined incomes. Thomas had invested heavily in a failed medical technology startup, losing nearly $800,000 that had been borrowed against their home equity. Most telling was the discovery of Julia's internet search history in the weeks before Thanksgiving, which included queries like family financial obligations to siblings, how to claim family property, and suing family members for inheritance. This evidence confirmed that the scheme had been premeditated, not a spontaneous reaction to discovering my wealth. During this difficult period, I received an unexpected call from Catherine Simmons, Walter's daughter who lived in Seattle. We had met briefly at Walter's funeral, but had maintained only occasional contact since. "Dad always spoke so highly of you," she said when I answered. "He would be heartbroken to see what your family is doing to you, and to the business you built together." Over coffee in my apartment, Catherine shared stories about Walter's own struggles with dishonest dealers who had threatened his reputation when he refused to authenticate questionable pieces. "Dad always said that in the antiques world, your name is the most valuable thing you own," she told me. He stood his ground even when it cost him business in the short term. The right clients always returned because integrity matters in this field. Her visit provided not just emotional support but clarity about what Walter would have advised in this situation. "Dad would tell you to fight back with truth," Catherine said as she left. "Not with anger or revenge, but with simple, undeniable facts. People like your sister count on others being too embarrassed or conflict-averse to call out their behavior." With renewed determination, I began working with Elaine to develop a comprehensive strategy. Rather than simply defending against Julia's baseless claims, we would present complete transparency about my business practices and wealth acquisition. We gathered documentation for every major purchase and sale over the past 6 years, including authentication certificates, provenance research, and transaction records. We prepared statements from respected museum curators about my ethical business practices and contributions to historical preservation. The emotional breakthrough came when I finally understood that my family's reaction had nothing to do with me and everything to do with their own insecurities and values. They hadn't suddenly started seeing me differently. They had simply added a dollar value to the person they had always dismissed. Their behavior reflected their own relationship with money and status, not any genuine concern for family bonds or shared prosperity. This realization freed me from the lingering hope of their approval that had influenced so many of my decisions. I wrote a detailed letter documenting the pattern of dismissal and sudden interest in my life, not to send to them, but to clarify my own thinking. The exercise helped me see that I had been seeking validation from people incapable of providing it given their fundamental values. No amount of success on their terms would ever be enough, and success on my terms would never be truly valued. With Elaine's guidance, I prepared a countersuit for defamation and intentional emotional distress, documenting the online reviews, false statements to clients, and invasion of privacy. Though filing immediately might have provided emotional satisfaction, we decided to hold it in reserve, offering Julia and my parents one opportunity to resolve matters privately before escalating further. The goal was resolution that protected my business and reputation, not vengeance or further family destruction. Rather than responding with the same aggressive tactics my family had employed, I arranged a mediation meeting at Elaine's office. The formal setting, with its polished conference table and city views, provided neutral ground where emotions might be contained by professionalism. Julia arrived with her attorney, a stern woman with a reputation for aggressive litigation. My parents came separately, my father bringing his longtime friend who happened to be a tax attorney. Thomas, perhaps recognizing his vulnerability given his direct threats, chose not to attend. Before we begin discussing the legal claims, Elaine stated once everyone was seated, my client would like to present some information relevant to the allegations made against him. With that introduction, I distributed comprehensive binders containing complete business records for hidden treasures, authentication certificates for disputed items, and the original will from our grandmother specifically leaving her collection to me based on my appreciation for their historical significance. As you can see, I explained, keeping my voice steady despite the tension in the room, every item in my inventory has been properly acquired, authenticated, and documented. I've included statements from the leading experts in American antiques confirming my business practices and the provenance of significant pieces. My sister's attorney flipped through the binder with increasing discomfort, while my father studied the financial records with the intensity of someone searching for errors that weren't there. Julia kept her eyes downcast, refusing to engage with the evidence contradicting her claims. The financial forensic expert, Elaine, had explained my business model and investment strategy, detailing how my current net worth had been ethically and legally accumulated. Based on our thorough review, he concluded, Andreas has maintained exemplary business practices, paid all appropriate taxes, and built his wealth through legitimate expertise and investment rather than any questionable practices. When he finished, I placed a second set of documents on the table, these showing the evidence of Julia and Thomas's financial mismanagement and the coordinated campaign to damage my reputation. I have grounds for a substantial countersuit, I said quietly. The defamatory statements, interference with business relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress represent actionable damages that could exceed several $1 million. The room fell silent as this information sank in. Julia's attorney whispered urgently to her client, while my father removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes in a gesture of defeat I had never before witnessed from him. However, I continued, I have no desire to pursue further legal action if we can resolve this matter today. I won't be transferring funds as demanded, but I do have an alternative proposal. I outlined my decision to establish the Walter Simmons Foundation for Historical Preservation, which would provide educational opportunities for students interested in American craftsmanship and fund conservation projects for historically significant items. I'm allocating $3 million to this foundation, I explained. It will include a scholarship program that can benefit Emma and Jacob when they reach college age, provided they demonstrate genuine interest in their education. My sister finally looked up, her expression unreadable. And the rest? She asked, her voice smaller than I had heard it since childhood. I won't be providing direct cash transfers to anyone, I replied firmly, but I'm willing to offer the family something potentially more valuable. Access to financial counseling with Sarah Williams, who has guided my investments successfully for years. She's agreed to work with any family member who sincerely wants to improve their financial situation through better management rather than windfalls. My father began to object, but I continued before he could build momentum. Additionally, I'm willing to establish education funds for Emma and Jacob that will remain under my control until they reach college age. The funds will be sufficient for 4 years at quality schools, though not necessarily the status institutions you might prefer. This offer is contingent on immediate withdrawal of all legal claims and a signed agreement preventing future claims or interference with my business. Julia's attorney advised her in whispers that this was likely the best outcome given the weakness of their case and the strength of potential counterclaims. My father, ever the pragmatist, when faced with unwinnable situations, nodded slowly. "The foundation is named after your mentor, not your family," he observed, a final attempt to assert control. "Yes," I confirmed, "because Walter supported my passion when my family dismissed it. He saw value in me when you saw only disappointment. The foundation honors those values." The initial response was anger, particularly from my mother, who claimed I was publicly humiliating the family. But as the reality of their legal position became clearer through their attorney's uncomfortable shifting and whispered advice, shame gradually replaced indignation. Julia, confronted with documentation of her campaign against me, broke down not in the theatrical tears I had witnessed at her house, but in genuine, messy sobbing. "We never have enough," she admitted between breaths. "No matter how much we make, we need more for the lifestyle, for the schools, for the summer programs. Everyone thinks we have it all figured out, but we're drowning in payments." My parents, witnessing their golden child's collapse, seemed to age before my eyes. My father, always commanding and certain, stared at his hands as though seeing them for the first time. "We pushed you toward what we valued," he said eventually. "Maybe we never asked what you valued." "You didn't," I confirmed. "And when I showed you, you dismissed it. The money didn't change who I am. It just made my choices harder for you to dismiss. But keeping my wealth private was the right decision. Your reaction, when you discovered it, confirmed that." The legal matters were resolved through a comprehensive agreement drafted by our respective attorneys. All claims against me were withdrawn, and the temporary restraining order on my inventory was lifted immediately. In exchange, I established the educational trusts for my niece and nephew and provided a written commitment to financial counseling resources for family members. The personal relationships proved more complicated to restructure. I set clear boundaries, respect for my choices, no unsolicited financial advice, and absolutely no more discussions of transferring wealth. My parents struggled with these limitations but eventually recognized they were non-negotiable if they wanted any relationship with me. Julia and Thomas, their financial house of cards collapsing under scrutiny, reluctantly accepted financial counseling as a condition of my assistance with their children's education. The process was painful for them, requiring significant lifestyle adjustments and honest conversations about priorities and values. Emma and Jacob, innocent in the entire conflict, continued to visit my shop on weekends, developing genuine interest in history and craftsmanship without parental coaching. In the aftermath of the conflict, I found renewed purpose in expanding hidden treasures to include educational programs about historical preservation. The Walter Simmons Foundation provided funding for apprenticeships, connecting young craftspeople with traditional techniques at risk of being lost to time. These initiatives brought new energy to the shop and connected me with a community of like-minded individuals who appreciated both the monetary and cultural value of historical artifacts. Holiday gatherings transformed into smaller, more authentic celebrations, with what I came to think of as my chosen family fellow collectors, craftspeople, and historians who shared my passion. Catherine Simmons and her family became regular visitors, carrying forward Walter's legacy through shared meals and stories. These connections, based on genuine shared interests rather than obligation, provided the belonging I had always sought from my biological family. The scholarship program I established became particularly meaningful as talented young people discovered paths similar to mine. One student, a gifted woodworker from a family that pressured him toward engineering, found validation through the program that I had lacked at his age. Mentoring these students healed something in me that family rejection had damaged. My own healing journey progressed unevenly. There were still moments of anger when I remembered the betrayal, still holiday mornings when I felt the absence of family traditions despite their toxicity. But these moments diminished as I built a life rich in purpose and authentic connections. I learned that worth, the kind that matters, isn't measured in dollars or status, but in integrity and impact. Looking back now, 5 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, I understand that discovering my financial success didn't transform my family's perception of me. It simply revealed what had always been there. The experience taught me that sometimes losing what you thought you needed opens the door to what you truly deserve. Standing firm in my values cost me the fantasy of family approval, but gave me something far more valuable: a life aligned with my true self and surrounded by people who appreciate that self without a price tag attached. I often think about what Walter told me years ago while examining a colonial-era desk with a secret compartment. The real treasures are never what people think they're looking for. He was right in ways that extend far beyond antiques. The fortune I built searching for hidden value in overlooked objects was substantial, but the true wealth came from finding the courage to honor my own hidden value when others could not. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? Or discovered that money changed how people treated you? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences about family, integrity, and finding your own path. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most valuable treasures are the principles we refuse to compromise.